Liverpool won the Premier League title last season by 10 points, and it most likely would have been more had they not gone partying in Ibiza and Dubai before the season had ended, failing to win any of their last 4 matches. Prior to that, the Reds led second place Arsenal by 15 points. That was despite the fact that Federico Chiesa, who barely got a kick in the Premier League, was new boss Arne Slot's only new signing, after he had been handed the seemingly daunting task of replacing Jurgen Klopp. Slot didn't make it look daunting at all though. Liverpool were already the favourites to retain the Premier League title coming into this season, before a record-breaking summer in which the Reds spent more money in a single transfer window than any other club in the history of the sport. Having kept their powder relatively dry in recent years, Liverpool forked out a stunning £415 million, eclipsing Chelsea's record summer window in 2023, to bring the likes of Florian Wirtz, Diogo Jota, and Alexander Isak to the club. Phil McNulty, the chief football writer at the BBC, penned an article in September which was headlined, "Liverpool's record-breaking summer has surely made title a formality," meanwhile others penned pieces predicting record points tallies, and, even 4 games into the season, an invincible campaign. But less than 3.5 months into this season, Liverpool find themselves in the bottom half of the Premier League table, and in the bottom 3 of the form table. The Reds have lost back-to-back league games by a margin of 3 goals for the first time in over 60 years. They just lost 3-0 at home for the first time in over a decade. And they have lost 6 of their opening 12 games for the first time since the 2015-16 season. That was enough to cost Brendan Rodgers his job, prompting Jurgen Klopp's appointment. What's more, Liverpool's 6 Premier League losses this season have all come in their last 7 games. It previously took them 58 matches to lose the same number of games. Arne Slot no longer just appears to be enduring a mere bout of second season syndrome, but an acute affliction which is threatening to turn terminal, derailing both his time at Liverpool, something which would have seemed unthinkable at the end of last season, and the most expensive transfer window of all time. Usually on this channel, I try to reserve my what on earth is going on videos for clubs in dire financial or truly chaotic ownership situations, many of them literally on the verge of collapse. Liverpool face no such sense of immediate peril. They are the 4th most valuable football club in the world and will post record revenue figures in their next set of accounts. But I have been inundated with requests to make this video following Liverpool's latest 3-0 defeat at home against Nottingham Forest, and ultimately, this is the People's Channel after all. Besides, it is fairly extraordinary. Liverpool have already lost 50% more games this season than they did throughout the whole of last season, despite signing the 2nd highest scorer in the Premier League from last season, when they already owned the highest, the Bundesliga Player of the Year in each of the last 2 seasons, and 8 further signings who took their total summer spending to twice the annual GDP of the Falkland Islands. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey not to the Falkland Islands, who are wholly irrelevant to Liverpool's current struggles, please try to get them out of your mind now, but to Merseyside, as we take a look at Liverpool's nightmare last 2 months, why Arne Slot changed Liverpool's tactics so radically this season, and whether they are ultimately doomed to fail, or he and Liverpool are capable of eventually making them work. When discussing Liverpool's difficulties this season, it seems remiss, and bordering upon callous, not to start by acknowledging the tragic death of Diogo Jota. The world, and especially football, has a tendency to move on from things very quickly. There's always another game and another story which dictates that, through no malice or anyone's fault necessarily, people forget and move on. That's easily done if you're a football fan who follows the sport as a form of entertainment, but when that person is a colleague and, in most instances, a close friend, the impact tends to be far more lasting and profound. When Scotland qualified for their first World Cup in almost 30 years last week in the most dramatic circumstances imaginable, Andy Robertson's first thought, when interviewed, wasn't fulfilling his own career ambitions, his team's, or even an entire nation's, but his Liverpool teammate of 5 years, with whom he couldn't share the moment. Robertson said that he had been in bits all day because he couldn't get Jota out of his head. Arne Slot has said that his team miss Jota as both a player and as a person, but he has insisted that he won't use the 28-year-old's death as an excuse for Liverpool's poor performances and results. That's understandable. Not only is it intangible and impossible to measure, as Slot stated, but it would also come across as being crass and distasteful for the under-fire Liverpool manager to frame the death of a father and a newlywed husband in those terms. I'm not the under-fire Liverpool manager though, so I can acknowledge that, however intangible, and however meaningless and inconsequential, obviously, in comparison to the grief suffered by his grieving widow and children, it is obscene to imagine that Jota's death hasn't had an enormous impact upon all of those who shared a dressing room with him and upon Liverpool as a football club. Few clubs and footballers, thankfully, have to deal with the death of a teammate, but to go from the euphoric high of lifting the Premier League title as a group to the immense grief of losing a colleague and friend in totally unexpected and fairly horrific circumstances in truth, just 11 days after his wedding while he was on his way back to Liverpool to begin pre-season training, is almost incomprehensible. And it is difficult to imagine that just 4 months on, it is worth remembering, any of them will have been able to come to terms with it. I lost a friend who I sometimes played football with in similarly unforeseen circumstances about 4 years ago, and I still think of him before and after virtually every time that I play. Partly because he was the best player that I ever played with, so whenever I'm on the losing team I can't help but wish that he was still around and still on my team, but mainly because he was a mate and it's hard to believe both that they're gone and not to be totally consumed by the fragility, tragedy, and absurdity of life. And I'm just having a kickabout with friends, not competing professionally in the most competitive league, in the most competitive sport on the planet, in the team that probably had the highest expectations of any coming into this season as defending champions and pre-season favourites to win the title. I don't think that Jota's death is the sole reason behind Liverpool's poor form or catastrophic drop-off this season, otherwise this video would end here because there'd be nothing else to talk about, but I do think that it would be wrong to start by talking about anything else. Liverpool won 25 of their 38 Premier League games last season en route to winning the title, but it was defeat against PSG in the Champions League that left the most lasting impression upon Arne Slot. Having inherited Jurgen Klopp's squad at Anfield, and added to it only with Federico Chiesa, who suffered from injury and fitness problems all season, Slot, very wisely, operated with a light touch, not trying to change too much too soon with what was already a formidable squad who were brilliantly drilled under Klopp. There were hints of Slot's own ideas. He played with a more advanced midfielder, for example, typically Dominic Szoboszlai, turning Klopp's 4-3-3 into a 4-2-3-1, at least when Liverpool were in possession. He transformed Ryan Gravenberch, who had been a squad player under Klopp in his debut campaign, only registering 12 starts in the league, into a focal point at the base of his midfield. And he took off the few shackles that still remained on Mohamed Salah, in terms of pressing and tracking back, keeping him high and wide, which paved the way for Salah's best ever season in terms of goals and assists. Broadly, however, Slot merely tweaked the team that Jurgen Klopp had built, with perhaps his most telling contributions coming in terms of his man management and tremendous substitutions, which won Liverpool an enormous 23 points last season from losing positions. For all of their success in the league, though, Liverpool were roundly outplayed away in Paris in March, in the round of 16 of the Champions League. At the time, Liverpool had lost just one of their opening 27 matches in the Premier League, all the way back in September, and they travelled to the French capital off the back of convincing victories against both Newcastle and Man City. PSG, meanwhile, despite still being invincible domestically at the time, had a reputation for being flaky in Europe, and they had already endured a fairly tumultuous league phase of the competition, looking likely at one stage, following just one win from their opening 5 games, to go out. Liverpool actually won the game 1-0, but Harvey Elliott's 87th minute winner came completely against the run of play. PSG had 27 shots to Liverpool's 2, 10 on target to Liverpool's 1, and an expected goals of 1.78 to Liverpool's 0.27. It was a similar story at Anfield the following week, where PSG had 21 shots, 8 on target, and an expected goals of 2.63, as they overturned their first leg deficit to draw the tie 1-1 before emerging victorious on penalties. On paper, it was an extremely narrow defeat for Liverpool over more than 200 minutes against the eventual European champions. On grass, they had been run ragged and taught a footballing lesson. It left a lasting impression on Slot, who was already predisposed, based upon his other jobs and experiences, towards more offensive and expansive football. Though Liverpool won the title at a canter last season, there were a number of games which they won, or drew, by incredibly fine margins, in chaotic and unpredictable manners. Liverpool lacked control, that all-important word in modern football, and there was a sense in which, especially as the campaign wore on, teams had begun to figure them out. What Slot wanted, and this is me ventriloquising him now, though, if you read between the lines, then I think that you can conclude that he has said as much, is a team that didn't rely upon moments, but, like PSG, simply blew teams away. Liverpool, therefore, would no longer be at the mercy of refereeing decisions, misjudged long balls, which are a particular pet peeve of Slot's, or an especially stubborn low block. It's a little simplistic, but almost everything about Liverpool's approach to this season can be viewed through the lens of attempting to emulate PSG. Liverpool signed two quick and tireless fullbacks in Jeremy Frimpong and Milos Kerkez to replace the ageing Andy Robertson and the more creative and departing Trent Alexander-Arnold. Similar to Achraf Hakimi and Nuno Mendes, they have prioritised technical prowess over athleticism and defensive or tactical discipline in midfield, similar to PSG's trio of Neves, Vitinha and Ruiz, most notably with the arrival of Florian Wirtz, who is arguably Liverpool's first out-and-out attacking midfielder, or number 10, since Philippe Coutinho left the club almost 8 years ago, and they have attempted to become much more attacking, keeping more of the ball, but whilst becoming far more open and conceding a lot more chances. The most significant shift has been in terms of playmaking. Jurgen Klopp famously stated that no playmaker in the world can be as good as an effective counter-pressing situation. What he meant by that, as he has elaborated elsewhere, is that it requires a certain amount of build-up play to get a playmaker, typically a number 10 in possession, and that even a genius playmaker isn't going to get it right in terms of their decision-making and/or execution of a defence-splitting pass every time, whereas an effective counter-press, meaning one which with some degree of consistency is able to win the ball back high up the pitch, puts you automatically in dangerous areas, and creates better chances at a higher volume than even prime Ronaldinho or Juan Roman Riquelme ever could. That was Klopp's view, and the way in which he chose to express it to his players. Klopp's midfields, by extension, were always highly functional. He played a true 4-3-3 with a midfield trio of, let's say, Jorginho, Wijnaldum, Fabinho and Jordan Henderson, which was probably Klopp's most iconic midfield, which pressed with incredibly high intensity, had excellent shape and coordination, and superb stamina and industry. There wasn't a great deal of creativity, typically, in the Liverpool midfield. Maybe Thiago Alcantara when he was fit being an exception. Certainly when contrasted, though, with the likes of Kevin De Bruyne and David Silva at Man City, or even a Bruno Fernandes at Manchester United during the same period, with almost all of the direct creativity in the Liverpool team coming from their front three and their fullbacks, most notably Trent Alexander-Arnold. In the 2019-20 season, Liverpool's only Premier League title win under Klopp, none of their midfielders made more Premier League assists than Jordan Henderson with 5. Cesar Azpilicueta made 6. Yet Liverpool scored 85 goals, only lost 3 games, and won 99 points, making them, statistically, one of the greatest Premier League teams of all time. Slot has inverted that formula, which he largely maintained last season, despite pushing Dominic Szoboszlai a little bit further forward, by making Liverpool's chief playmaker Florian Wirtz, as opposed to counter-pressing, for the first time since Coutinho left the club. This is an experiment which, for a number of reasons, hasn't worked. Firstly, and most plainly, Wirtz hasn't been very good. It is early days, of course, and Wirtz is still only 22, but no goals or assists in his first 11 Premier League appearances, and no goals in 16 in all competitions, probably isn't what Liverpool anticipated from their new £100 million signing, rising to £116 million, subject to add-ons. Wirtz has been less effective than no press, let alone an effective counter-press. A beautiful footballer at his best, who is graceful and silky in possession, Wirtz combined that with a ruthless cutting edge, which saw him win successive Player of the Year awards in the Bundesliga. Talismanic at Bayer Leverkusen, where he was, by any metric, the star man, Wirtz has been peripheral at Liverpool. No longer the star attraction, despite being the linchpin in Liverpool's new system and burdened with the expectations which come with such an obscene transfer fee, Wirtz is yet to make any kind of real mark in the Premier League. There is an extent to which Liverpool haven't played to his strengths. Due to the defensive vulnerabilities that Liverpool showed with Wirtz at the apex of an attack-minded three-man midfield, Slot has reverted to something which more closely resembles their shape and personnel from last season, which has forced Wirtz out wide, where he can sometimes appear isolated and lost. He's also someone who needs to be constantly involved and frequently on the ball in order to get the best out of him. Liverpool have become so accustomed in recent years to hitting diagonals out to the flanks, most notably from Virgil van Dijk to Mohamed Salah in the right channel, and to relying upon Trent Alexander-Arnold to create from wide areas, that the instincts of most of their players is to look for passes into the wide areas. There have been several games this season where Wirtz has shown for the ball, but feeding him may be deemed a riskier pass, and Liverpool's players have instead opted to play a less incisive but safer ball out wide. Inevitably, what happens in these situations, if a player no longer gets the ball when they make these movements, they stop making them. Football is basically just a whole series of positive and negative feedback loops, and it is a manager's job to try and facilitate as many positive ones as possible. Of course, Wirtz himself has to share a large degree of responsibility. His teammates, one imagines, would be a bit more intent on getting the ball into him, even if the pass entailed greater risk, if they felt that he was likely to receive it on the half-turn, beat a man, and either score a goal or hit a defence-splitting pass, neither of which he has done so far in the Premier League. Some of these relationships and understandings will likely come with time, but Arne Slot and Liverpool don't have time, hence Wirtz's positional shift, in which case, they're not directly at least, building towards the system that Slot ideally envisions them playing, or the role that their more than £100 million playmaker was signed to perform. This is an advert brought to you by me. A lot of people stop me in the street and say, "Wow, it's Alfie Potts-Armour. You're the best football YouTuber in the world, and somehow even more handsome in real life than online. Please may I have your autograph, take a photo, and sleep with you?" And I have to say, look, I'm very sorry, that is awfully kind of you, but I do have a girlfriend. The other thing that they often say, almost always really, is there any way that I can get more of you? Is there perhaps a second channel of yours that I could subscribe to where you make to-camera documentaries about various interesting topics? And I say, yes, it's called the Alfie Potts-Armour YouTube channel, and funnily enough, I just uploaded my latest video there about the Basque derby between Real Sociedad and Athletic Club, the history of Basque sport and culture, and why that game is so unique among major football rivalries. I know, it sounds fascinating, and it is, which is why I am advertising it to you now. No payments were made in exchange for this advert. HITC Sevens and Alfie Potts-Armour are the same person. T's and C's apply. Now back to the video. Wirtz isn't the only high-profile Liverpool signing, you may be aware, who has endured a difficult start to life at the club. In fact, none of them, with the sole exception of Hugo Ekitike, have made any kind of positive impression. Florian Wirtz spent around 5 weeks as Liverpool's club record signing, before the Reds completed the signing of Alexander Isak for not just a club but a British record fee on transfer deadline day. At £125 million, plus a reported £5 million of potential future add-ons, Isak is the third most expensive footballer of all time, trailing only PSG's 2017 double salvo of Neymar and Kylian Mbappe. The pressure on Isak is, if anything, even more intense than it is on Wirtz, by virtue of the fact that there is less leniency for him within the public imagination. As he is 26 as opposed to 22, he isn't having to adjust to a new league this season, but also, even more significantly, because of the manner in which Isak's move to Liverpool came about. The Swedish number 9, who scored over 50 goals for Newcastle over the last 2 seasons, went on strike over the summer, informing Newcastle that he would never play for the club again in one of the messiest transfer sagas in years. We don't need to relitigate Newcastle and Isak's sides of the stories again. Who cares? But there is no doubt that Isak's forthright refusal to play while still under contract left a sour taste not only in the mouths of Newcastle supporters, but quite a lot of neutrals. There is something very British, which is partly benevolent and partly toxic, I think, about wanting to see someone be brought down a peg or two, either because they are deemed to have behaved in too self-important a manner, in which case I think it's at least understandable, or sometimes just because they have been wildly successful and there is a clamour for them to be brought back down to earth, which is probably a little less understandable. I remember this perhaps most vividly in the case of another player signed for a British record fee, Fernando Torres at Chelsea, almost 15 years ago, where there was a degree of relish seemingly every weekend about his ongoing goal droughts and difficulties hitting his stride at Chelsea, particularly in the Premier League. You saw something very similar with Paul Pogba following his return to Manchester United, Romelu Lukaku after he rejoined Chelsea, and to a certain extent Jack Grealish at Manchester City, among many others. Grealish, you may recall, went from practically being the nation's sweetheart at Aston Villa, revered for his swagger and invention on the ball, and there being huge demand for him to start at Euro 2020, to being lambasted at Man City, labelled as a flop within weeks of his arrival, and for people arguing that he shouldn't even be in the England squad. Of course, events impact that shift in sentiment to a certain extent, but there is also an element of mob mentality and wanting to see both a club that has paid an enormous transfer fee and a player that has been signed for one fail. I think that a very similar sentiment exists around Alexander Isak right now, and for a number of reasons, he has been unable to silence his critics. What's more, his critics aren't wrong, or, for the most part, even over-embellishing. It's actually difficult to overstate just how bad Isak has been when he has played for Liverpool this season. Beyond the eye test, where he has appeared void of confidence, unfit, and highly ineffective, statistically, if you look at stats-based player ratings such as those formulated by Who Scored, out of 455 players to have played at least 1 minute of Premier League football this season, Isak ranks 447th in terms of his performances. In other words, out of 455 players, he has been the 9th worst in the entire division, and of the 8 players who have been worse than him, only Wolves goalkeeper Jose Sarr, who has been dropped for Sam Johnston this season for the team that is bottom of the league, has played more than 90 minutes of football this season. Those are a fairly remarkable set of statistics about a £125 million British record signing who was getting best striker in the world shouts last season. Of course, the fact that Isak went on strike over the summer before forcing through a move on deadline day meant that he wasn't involved in any team training or matches throughout the whole of pre-season. Isak, therefore, lacked both match fitness and, even more importantly, match sharpness when he joined Liverpool already 3 games into the season. In his absence, French international Diogo Jota, himself signed for a not exactly insignificant potential £80 million plus fee from Eintracht Frankfurt, had made a really bright start, scoring in Liverpool's first 2 Premier League games against Bournemouth and Newcastle, as well as in the Community Shield against Crystal Palace. He scored again against Everton in the 5th game of the season, in which Alexander Isak got his first Premier League minutes under his belt in a Liverpool shirt, but he was sent off against Southampton in the EFL Cup, which saw him suspended ahead of Liverpool's September trip to Selhurst Park. That handed Isak his first Premier League start for Liverpool, having scored his first goal in that same cup win over Southampton, but the Reds suffered their first defeat of the campaign away at Crystal Palace. Isak still hasn't added to his 1 goal against Championship Southampton, now goalless in 5 in the league, and in late October, he suffered a groin injury. Isak missed 12 games with a groin injury for Newcastle in the 2023-24 season, and a couple more games last season, so perhaps it shouldn't come as any surprise that the combination of no pre-season, 2 international breaks, and a premature Premier League start culminated in him picking up yet another one. Isak has often been described as being slightly withdrawn and difficult to read, enormously driven and ambitious, but also a little quiet and reclusive. He's always been prone to streaky patches of form, even at Newcastle, where he was broadly excellent. He scored 7 goals in 7 games during his debut campaign at St James's Park, which was immediately followed by a run of 7 matches in which he didn't score a single goal. In the 2023-24 season, Isak endured another barren spell in the build-up to Christmas, in which he only scored 1 in 7, before going on a run of 9 games, in which he scored 10 goals. Even last season, in which Isak was lavish with praise, and deservedly so, for his fantastic level of output and overall performances, he only scored 1 goal in his opening 5 games, and 11 of his 23 Premier League goals, so almost half of them, came in an astonishing run of just 8 games over the festive period, in which Isak was on fire. Isak, like Wirtz, was also the clear and obvious talisman at his previous club, with a system that was set up to serve him, and wide players like Harvey Barnes and particularly Jacob Murphy tasked primarily with providing him service. That's very different to the situation at Liverpool, where Isak will have to earn himself the title of talisman, isn't even guaranteed a starting berth right now, when one thinks of the fee that was also paid for Hugo HITC and his more impressive start, and wingers like Mohamed Salah and Cody Gakpo either side of him, who are determined to score goals and make an impression all of their own, as opposed to primarily serving him. The end result is an isolated and ineffective £125 million centre forward. Isak only touched the ball 12 times in 67 minutes, before being withdrawn in Liverpool's most recent 3-0 defeat at home against Nottingham Forest, and the highest number of touches that he has had in a Premier League game this season was 30, in Liverpool's 2-1 defeat away at Chelsea. He's only attempted 4 take-ons all season, and not a single one of them has been successful. Nottingham Forest centre-back Murillo had 3 times as many shots at the weekend as Isak, the man who he was ostensibly primarily tasked with marking. What's clear, both from the statistics and just watching Liverpool play, is both that Isak is utterly devoid of service, but is also having no luck in influencing games, or carving out his own opportunities, or chances for others, something which has long been a forte of his due to his quick feet and impressive ball-carrying capabilities. None of this is to say that Isak isn't still a fantastic footballer, or even that he won't come good at some stage for Liverpool. He is too good, you have to feel, to possibly keep playing this badly or being this impotent. Assuming that he is given a run of games up front ahead of Ekitike, and he gets up to full match sharpness, the goals will eventually come for Isak. There is less of an inevitability, perhaps, about Milos Kerkez recovering from his horrendous start. Kerkez is only 22, and he has gone from playing in a team that kept less than 50% possession on average last season, to one that wants to dominate games, keeps the most possession of any team in the division, and looks to batter teams with wave after wave of attack. There is a certain irony in the fact that Kerkez has joined Liverpool from perhaps the most effective counter-pressing team in the division, at the exact moment that Liverpool are attempting to pivot away from relying on counter-pressing as their primary creative tool. Sod's law, I guess. Kerkez has been abysmal though, the way in which he gave Amari Hutchinson the freedom of Anfield to cut inside onto his favoured left foot, in the build-up to Morgan Gibbs-White's goal at the weekend being just one example. Meanwhile on the opposite side, Jeremy Frimpong, a man who barely missed a minute of football over the last 3 years at Bayer Leverkusen, is already on his 3rd hamstring injury on Merseyside. As with towering Italian centre-back Giovanni Leone, who joined Liverpool in the summer for a reported £26 million from Parma, only to suffer a season-ending ACL injury on his debut, there is a degree of misfortune which also has to be acknowledged. Liverpool had an extremely settled first-choice 11 last season, as was the case throughout most of Jurgen Klopp's tenure at the club, and they enjoyed relatively good fortune in terms of injuries, with key players like Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk, and their first-choice midfield trio of Gravenberch, McAllister and Szoboszlai barely missing a game last term. That hasn't been the case so far this season, with early injuries to Leone, Isak, Frimpong, Alisson, again, and most recently, Florian Wirtz and Conor Bradley. Nor is it just Liverpool's new signings who have failed to impress. Established superstars, who are usually so dependable, most notably Mohamed Salah and Virgil van Dijk, have both fallen way below the levels that they have set in recent years. Salah enjoyed his best ever season in terms of goal contributions in Arne Slot's debut campaign, but I think that it is underestimated and underpriced in, when considering Liverpool's slump this season, the degree to which they have overhauled their forward line. Mohamed Salah was the only player who played more games for Liverpool last season than Luis Diaz, who scored 17 goals and made 8 assists in 50 appearances. Beyond the goal contributions though, Diaz's energy and industry was a crucial part of Liverpool's highly effective press, especially since Mohamed Salah's workload was reduced in order to keep him higher up the pitch, and more focused on providing attacking returns. The reasons for selling Diaz, age 28, after Bayern Munich offered a reported £65.5 million were compelling, especially when one thinks back to the smartly timed and equally lucrative sale of Sadio Mane. But whereas Mane was sold 6 months after Diaz had been brought in, effectively as his long-term replacement, along with Darwin Núñez, who arrived from Benfica that season, two forwards who are also fantastic athletes and full of running, Liverpool not only didn't sign anyone who is remotely like-for-like as a replacement for Diaz over the summer, they also sold Darwin Núñez. No one can deny that, on paper, swapping Núñez for Isak and HITC appears to be a monumental upgrade. And it is. But what that analysis overlooked, it is clear to see with the benefit of hindsight, is not only Darwin Núñez's work ethic and the way in which Mohamed Salah often thrived in the chaos that he created, either deliberately or inadvertently, but also his importance as a physical and aerial presence in both boxes. Liverpool lost Núñez, Diaz, and, tragically of course, Diogo Jota over the summer, 3/5 of the regular constituents of their front five last season, alongside Hakpo and Salah. Meanwhile, Salah's energy and intensity have undoubtedly waned, after he played literally all 38 Premier League matches for Liverpool last season, now aged 33, and made a record 52 appearances in all competitions. Arne Slot even admitted to, quote, almost over-exploiting Salah last season, and in a forward line already stripped of energy, athleticism and physicality, it shows. One critique of Liverpool's recruitment over the summer, and Arne Slot's vision for the club, with high-profile adherents like club legend turned TV pundit Jamie Carragher, is that the club has turned away from athleticism and physicality at the exact moment that the Premier League has embraced it, with set pieces, long throws, and duels being more important than at any other stage over at least the last 10 years. It is interesting to note that PSG, who are seemingly Slot's ultimate inspiration, had some of their toughest times in the Champions League last season against Premier League opposition. Whilst Luis Enrique's side beat Stuttgart 4-1, Brest 10-0 over 2 legs, and Inter Milan 5-0 in the final, they lost 2-0 against Arsenal in the league phase, required penalties in order to overcome Liverpool in the round of 16, only won 5-4 on aggregate against Aston Villa, in a second leg where they were outfought and outrun at times, and Arsenal gave them a really tough test in the semis. They subsequently, of course, also lost 3-0 against Chelsea in the final of the FIFA Club World Cup, having previously cruised past Inter Miami, Bayern Munich and Real Madrid in the knockout stages, winning all 3 of those ties by at least 2 clear goals. That's despite the fact that PSG basically have the perfect players to execute that system, and had the luxury of being able to hone and perfect it in a much weaker and less competitive league, where they basically have to spontaneously combust in order to miss out on the Ligue 1 title. Liverpool enjoy no such luxuries in the richest league in the world, where they were far from the summer's only big spenders, with both Arsenal and Man City looking to recover from uncharacteristically poor campaigns, and Chelsea's immense spending finally starting to yield some results. Liverpool, similarly to PSG, and perhaps therefore not all that surprisingly, have looked far more effective in the Champions League than in the Premier League this season, where they have won 3 out of their opening 4 games, including victories against both Madrid clubs, which leaves them 8th in the league phase. Florian Wirtz, most notably, has looked far more comfortable playing in Europe, with a little bit more time and space in which to operate, playing his best game for the club in Trent Alexander-Arnold's return to Anfield against Real Madrid. Liverpool are still creating chances in the Premier League. They average the highest number of shots per 90 in the division, and the 4th highest non-penalty expected goals, trailing only the top 3. Against Nottingham Forest, Liverpool could, and probably should have been 2-0 up before Murillo fired in the game's opening goal, with only a remarkable headed block by Elliot Anderson on his own goal line, denying Alexis McAllister. If that goes in, it's probably a different afternoon, but to a certain extent, that is besides the point. What has made Liverpool such a formidable team for a number of years now, both under Klopp and under Slot last season, is their ability to overcome adversity and those moments of misfortune and find a way to win. Klopp called it mentality monsters. Liverpool haven't won a single point after going behind this season, and Anfield, where they had maintained an impressive record despite their recent slump, now threatens to slip away from them too. The stadium was half empty before the referee blew the final whistle against Forest. a crowd often characterised as being defiant and spurring their team on, was full of moans and groans as they lost midfield battles and couldn't unlock Sean Dyche's stubborn back line. Teams are no longer trying not to lose against Liverpool, as was the case last season. They are attempting to win, even at Anfield. Under different circumstances, this would be a blessing for Liverpool, providing them with the space in behind for the likes of Salah and Isak to wreak havoc. But right now, much of the havoc is taking place in their own half, with new fullbacks who are either injured or out of sorts, Virgil van Dijk wildly gesticulating as the foundations beneath him crumble, and Ibrahim Konate, who was formidable last season, now resembling a fan who has won a competition. Liverpool are good enough to make this system work, if work means improving their current form, scoring lots of goals, and most likely still qualifying for the Champions League. But if they want to win the league again, playing this way, they'll have to be just about perfect. That is pretty much it for today's video. There's loads more that I wanted to say in truth about Arne Slot's record in terms of overcoming adversity, such as his controversial AZ departure and redemption at Feyenoord, the degree to which some of these changes were enforced, since Liverpool were powerless to prevent Trent Alexander-Arnold from running down his contract, in search of a move to Real Madrid, a right-back who is basically without a like-for-like replacement in all of world football, meaning that they had to find a new creative outlet from somewhere, and Florian Wirtz's arrival can be viewed through that prism, along with Diogo Jota's death, which was, of course, even more out of their hands, and how Arne Slot's tinkering, hailed as genius as it rescued or won Liverpool so many points last season, is now being branded as floundering desperation and an inability to find solutions, as they fail to impact matches in the same way. I think there is also something to be said for the fact that Liverpool came into last season after finishing third, Klopp departing, and making virtually no new signings, with very low expectations. No pundits, you may recall, predicted that Liverpool would lift the title in pre-season, and many predicted that they would struggle to even qualify for the Champions League, allowing Liverpool to play under the least amount of pressure on them in several years, and for Slot to face very little scrutiny. That has been wholly inverted this season, in which the combination of being title winners, Guardiola's precedent of retaining the title being normalised, when historically it is anything but, and a vast summer of investment, making the pressure on Slot and the Liverpool squad immense. But I didn't have time to get through all of that, as this video, I'm sure you would all agree, is already long enough. Thank you all as ever for watching though. Just before I leave you, if you're not quite sure what to watch after this, I can highly recommend a video about why Spain's smallest province produces some of the world's best managers, which was uploaded just yesterday to the Alfie Potsama YouTube channel. The province of Gipuzkoa, in the Basque Country, has a population of barely 700,000 people, yet it is the birthplace of the likes of Mikel Arteta, Xabi Alonso, Unai Emery, and Andoni Iraola. I know, it's pretty extraordinary, and therefore, I think, well worth a watch. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, which both should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one, including the one that I just mentioned. You can also find me on various social media platforms, typically via the username at HITC Sevens, and you can now support my work additionally, should you wish to do so, either by becoming a channel member on the Alfie Potsama YouTube channel, or by heading to buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potsama, where you can also become a channel member, but Google won't take 30% of it. Anyway, that's all from me. I hope to see you very shortly. Take care out there until then. I love you all very much. Cheers.